Welcome to tonight's Horse Talk. My name's Kman. I am the founder and president of Chasing Horses Wild Horse Advocates. We advocate for the wild horses that call Theodore Roosevelt National Park home. Thanks for joining us tonight. Out of respect for everyone, we do have everyone muted and videos off. I will be giving a short presentation and then we will open this up to questions. If you have questions, please add them to the chat box and reply to everyone so that we can all see your questions. And hopefully this will avoid some of the same questions being asked by multiple people. I am grateful that Matt Arnold from Eubanks and Associates is able to join us today. Chasing Horses Wild Horse Advocates has personally been working with Matt and Eubanks and Associates since 2021. Matt is very well versed in the NEPA process, and our hope is that you leave here today with a better understanding of the current NEPA process and how to write an educated and impactful comment to the park. I also want to thank Eubanks and Associates for some of the information I used in here. They generously sent me some information, some slides that they used that kind of simplified what we want to say. Currently, comments are due to Theodore Roosevelt National Park by October 25th, 2023. We did file a request for an extension today with the superintendent. We will keep you updated on if our request is granted.
While still saying legally he had no choice and would have preferred to use that money for other border.
Theodore Roosevelt National Park is currently engaged in creating a management plan for the wild horses entrusted to their care. As a federal agency, they are guided by the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA. On December 12, 2022, Theodore Roosevelt National Park announced their plans to eliminate the entire herd of horses from the park. Chasing Horses Wild Horse Advocates immediately started pounding the pavement, and since December, we have gained a ton of support for these iconic wild horses. By the end of the last public comment period, over 19,000 people commented, with the overwhelming majority asking the park to allow a genetically viable herd of horses to stay in Theodore Roosevelt National Park. On September 25th, 2023, Theodore Roosevelt National Park released their draft environmental assessment, EA. While it seems clear to all of us that they did not take those 19,000 comments into consideration, they did. Within the draft EA, you will find their responses to requests to keep the horses within the boundaries of the park. If you do not agree with those responses and have factual data to support your reasons why, that is what you should comment on during this public comment period. So to start with, what is NEPA? NEPA is a procedural statute. It does not dictate outcomes. NEPA's key requirements on agencies says that they must take a hard look at direct, indirect, and cumulative impacts. They must consider a reasonable range of alternatives to the proposed action, including a no action alternative. This is Theodore Roosevelt National Park's Alternative A. They must prepare an environmental impact statement if impacts to the affected resources will be significant. This is something that we talk about a lot, and we believe the park should do an environmental impact statement. They keep thinking that the draft, like the EA that we got, is pretty sufficient. And they must respond to public comments. The EIS versus an EA. NEPA requires an EIS where impacts will be significant. So removing 200 horses from Theodore Roosevelt National Park, we believe will have a pretty significant impact on the environment in a lot of different ways. Comments should also highlight with evidence, studies, or personal anecdotes where possible why impacts will be significant to resources such as economic impacts to local governments, businesses, and residents, wildlife and wildlife habitats, historical and cultural resources, and ecologically critical areas. We hear this question a lot. I commented last time and it seems like the park is not listening. Why should I bother to comment again? The number one reason is that the freedom of just under 200 wild horses is exactly why you should comment. Also, 43 CFR 46.110C states the responsible official must, whenever practical, use a consensus-based management approach to the NEPA process. This means that NPS should consider any consensus-based alternatives put forth by those participating persons, organizations, or communities who may be interested in or affected by the proposed action. And where the decision maker finds that consensus-based alternative, if any, is not the preferred alternative, he or she must state the reasons for this determination in the environmental document. This means the more consensus we can build around a certain alternative, the better, because the National Park Service has a regulatory duty to seriously consider any such alternative or explain why they haven't. Your comments also need to be part of the public record. Every comment counts. What should you comment? The biggest thing everybody needs to understand is this is not a vote. Chasing Horses Wild Horse Advocates does not support any of the current alternatives that the park has given us, and we don't think you should either. None of them allow for a genetically viable herd of horses, and 2 out of 3 of them completely eliminate the herd. The driving force behind the draft EA is the purpose and need statement. The purpose and need statement will state a range of feasible alternatives and is determined by the purpose and need for the action. Comments can challenge an overly narrow purpose and need where it is not reasonably supported. A good place for you to start with your comments is with the purpose and need statement. TRMP's purpose and need statement says, the purpose of the proposed action is to address livestock, horse, and cattle herds within the park under relevant laws, regulations, policies, and management priorities, including the conservation of native species and the natural prairie ecosystem functions. The park has not defined a natural prairie ecosystem for us. Is that a natural prairie ecosystem that existed over 6,000 years ago? Is that a natural prairie ecosystem that Theodore Roosevelt experienced while he was in North Dakota? The park's purpose and need statement also omits any reference to the historical and cultural value of the herd. There's just some tips from Eubanks and Associates for preparing a strong NEPA comment. Make comments as concrete as possible, including explaining how the proposed action would harm or impair your interests in specific ways. Propose specific alternatives to the action that could achieve the stated purpose and need, rather than merely urging consideration of more alternatives in the abstract. Attach documents to your comments rather than simply providing a link to a website. Timely submit your comments. Consult the Citizens Guide to NEPA 2021 if you have questions. It is available online, and we do have that on our website, and we will show you that later. The alternatives, NEPA requires agencies to examine a reasonable range of alternatives to the action. So remember, just be concrete when you're suggesting other alternatives. Inadequate mitigation. NEPA requires agencies to mitigate impacts or explain why it will not do so. Comments as to the ineffectiveness of proposed mitigation members and/or best management practices should be tied to scientific literature or other credible evidence. The draft EA is the park's response to the last public comment period. Your comments should be similar to the ones you submitted last time. Comments should be able to be fact-checked. You should refrain from sending a comment solely based on emotion. We also strongly suggest writing your own comments. And if you choose to be a part of campaigns for form letters, please remember to send your own personalized comment in as well. The park takes the comments and divides them into different categories. The most impactful comments are the ones that are original and give viable solutions based on facts, not opinions. And that's something I just want to add, that the regional director, Bert Frost, said pretty much those exact words to us when we met with him in July. Those are the comments that they're looking for. The information about the park misleading the public with their creative interpretation of the Brownlee study came from our request for that document, and then looking at the data that was presented. As you read through the draft EA, the park has now made it easy for you to fact check them. They did a document dump earlier this week, and every document they cited in the draft EA is now listed on the park's planning website. I want to take a few minutes to show you a few different ways that you can find information that you need to make your comments. And we have a lot of that on our CHWHA website. So let me pull that up for you. So on our website, if you go to the Save the TRMP Wild Horse tab, you will see some information about the current environmental assessment process. We also have asked people to, people have asked us to put together talking points. So we did put together a talking point sheet that you can look at that give you some points that you can use to start your comment letter or use whatever is appropriate to you in your opinions. You can also download that sheet here. Here's the link for submitting your comments to the park. This is a copy of our January comment letter, which is of course filled with tons of information, facts, and cited different documents are cited. This is the 1978 environmental assessment. This is where alternative A comes from. This is the no action alternative. So if you wanted to read that, you can look at that here. The National Academy of Sciences report, using science to improve the BLM Wild Horse and Burro program, a way forward. This is an excellent resource for using documentation to comment. The BLM Wild Horse and Burro handbook is also another excellent resource for comment. Dr. Castle McLaughlin's report for historical facts. And then here's the link to the Citizen's Guide to NEPA, Having Your Voice Heard. I also want to show you that we do have a research library. We've been collecting information over the years, and so there's a lot of different things here, a lot of history, a lot of news reports, a lot of letters that we've sent to the park. Castle's report is here. Also, Castle's Badlands and Broomtails article is here. And then we also have a link that has a lot of the January 2023 comment letters that people shared with us. So there's a lot of really good letters here with a lot of good information, a lot of good points, a lot of good factual information. Again, we're going to ask that if you do use anything from these people's letters, of course, first of all, take their personal information out, and two, don't copy the entire letter and send it. That doesn't help, and that's not what the park is asking for. The other thing I want to show you is the link to the park's website. So when you click on the link, it will take you to the park planning website. And if you go to the project home, it's going to give you an overview of what the park is doing, when the comment period is, when it ends. They're going to be hosting a virtual meeting on October 10th. So it's got information about that. And then if you go over to here where it says open for comment, and if you click on the livestock environmental assessment, here's where you can download it, and here's where you can comment. You can also mail your comment letter in, and the address is there. If you click comment now, it's just a simple form putting in your information and putting your comments in. And then if you want to see the documents that they dumped, well, here under the document list, this is just all the different points, documents from all the different points of this process that we've been through from the beginning in March of 2022. But here is the reference documents for the livestock plan. So here is everything that they've used so far to write their environmental assessment. And Superintendent Angie Richmond also let me know that there would be more coming. So let me go back. That's all that I have right now. So if anyone has any questions, please put them in. And I'm going to also, Matt, make you a co-host to this meeting so that people can talk to you. And I just have to find you. Okay. So what questions do you guys have? I also want to say that I will be, hi, Matt. I think that you're muted.
Sorry.
Okay.
Hello, everybody.
I will say that we will start doing some blog posts now in the coming week that'll talk about different points and just kind of elaborate a little bit on some points. And again, if you ever have questions, feel free to email us at info@chwha.org. So who has questions, or what questions do you guys have for me or Matt?
I don't see anything in the chat box yet, Chris, but I have a question. The
Okay.
portal just opened today into the comment document, and it had been kind of offline and having technical difficulties for a couple days. And I know you submitted a request to push the deadline back, but I know you won't hear anything about that for a while, but what do you think is possible there? Because it has been offline and it's been hard for people to make comments.
I think that the website came back up yesterday. At some point yesterday morning, it did come back up. I know that I was on the website a few times yesterday.
Yeah,
I know that, I mean, we can ask them for one more day for that. I mean, and in reality, that's not going to do a whole lot. We're asking
right.
for another 30 days. So, Mary McDonald is asking Matt, in the January meeting, they said they would include the economic impact to the neighboring community. I haven't seen anything regarding that impact. Well, that's where the Brownlee report comes in, Mary. And it's all over the news. It's in the newspapers, and we did have a blog post about this. The park did answer. There was the Brownlee report talks about a visitor impact survey a visitor survey that was done in 2017 and 2018. And what the park did was took that report and said that only 49% of visitors support keeping a wild horse herd in the park. And that was a red flag when Matt and I were initially talking about the environmental assessment, and we kind of were skimming through it. Matt was like, whoa, we all know more than 49% of people want the horses to be in the park. And so Matt said to me, we need to get this report. So that's when I reached out to Superintendent Angie Richmond and said, hey, you need to make this available by the Code of Federal Regulations. So she did, and that's where the document dump came from. When we looked at that document dump, though, there are varying degrees of support. And what the park did was just took the strong support and didn't take the whole strongly support, and somewhat support, which equaled 89% of visitors surveyed saying that they want the horses in the park. The statement is also very misleading because the way they said it is only 49% of visitors support keeping the horses in the park. So your brain immediately would say, well, then 51% oppose. And that's far from true. Only, I think, a little over 4% of the people polled over the 3 degrees opposed keeping the wild horses in the park. And then the number one thing that in their polling of 22 different points, the number one thing that people wanted to see were the horses in the park. So they did answer that. And that's part of what we're saying, like, check the facts. And now, actually, I think, Matt, if I'm right, that Brownlee study actually becomes something quantitative that we can use for the environmental impact, right? Because that wasn't available before, right? Like, we can use it for our argument that
Yeah,
taking the
absolutely.
horses out.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's not something you would need to submit to the park, because that's clearly already before the agency.
Okay.
And in response to Mary's question, I will note that on page 61 under socioeconomics, that's where they have a discussion regarding the tourism economy and gateway communities. And to the extent that you don't agree with the analysis that's conducted there, that's something that you should bring up in your comments for sure.
All right, Angela's asking, is there a backup plan in place? Such as, can the state of North Dakota have the wild horses moved out of the TRMP to an area of safety? There's nothing like that in place that we're aware of. I do know that what's very unique here is the amount of support that we have, and the entire state of North Dakota is willing to work with the park in whatever way they can to help keep the horses in the park. And that's really the goal right now. Senator Hoeven, who's on the Appropriations Committee, is also fighting hard and talking to the National Park Service in Washington, D.C., trying to get them to allow the horses to stay in the park. And he did put language in the Interior Department's appropriations budget for that was just passed, strongly suggesting that the park keep the horses. So there's a lot of things still happening and a lot that we don't know, but right now the big thing is everybody needs to comment and see the value. I mean, there's a value in every single comment, and just make sure your comments are factual and are really impactful. So the emotional part of it, I understand this is very emotional for everybody. If you need to put some emotion in there, that's fine, but make sure that the fact part is what's really important. So the Brownlee report is 5 years old. Shouldn't this be more current? They're actually managing the horses under a 1978 environmental assessment. So, I mean, that's very recent in park standards, I guess, Matt. I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
The report being 5 years old, is that what you're saying? Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky area. I'll say that, yeah, we would certainly prefer to have more updated information, especially given that the EA cites growing trend, an increase in recent history. So that is also something that, you know, you should put in your comments if you feel that there should be more recent data on it. I don't disagree with Mary.
Okay, Julie asks, can you use a comparison of economic impact on a community as a result of the park's actions?
Not, Chris, do you want to? I'm not sure that I.
Can we use a comparison of economic impact on a community? Yes, you can, and that's actually what the stuff with the, I think if I'm understanding right, that's actually what the Brownlee study was saying. So Matt, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. When the 19,000 people commented last time, we know a lot of those people said, hey, if you take these horses out, there will definitely be a negative economic impact on the state of North Dakota, the city of Medora, the surrounding communities. And so the park had to answer that, right, Matt? So their answer is the Brownlee study. We had a visitor survey done in 2017 and 2018. And in that study, only 49% of visitors said that they want to see wild horses in the park. So to them, that means it's the minority of people. So therefore, there won't be a negative impact on the economy if they take the horses out of the park. So I hope that answers your question. So now what we do, right, Matt, now our job as people who are commenting is to say, hey, you misquoted the Brownlee study. Actually, 89% of people want the horses in the park and only 4% opposed. And so that kind of puts a hole in their part of their economic argument, Matt.
Yeah, no, so I think this all goes back to what Chris was talking about with respect to this, the touchstone under NEPA is whether or not the agency's taking a hard look at the impact of its decision. So for purposes of, comments, if, the economic impact on the surrounding communities, if you don't feel like that is, they've taken a hard look, you certainly say as much to them and point out why. And that, the Brownlee study is certainly a part of that, no doubt. But I'm not an expert on tourism, but I imagine the people who rely on the park for their livelihood and the visitors that go there have something to say about it. And I think that's where your comments come in. That's so important for the park to understand.
I think too that I want to stress, because you said this to me early on when we started talking about the NEPA process, Matt, is that sentence of it requires the agency to take a hard look, and that comes up a lot. So did they truly take a hard look at the impact of what they're doing in all the different points that they've lined out?
Yeah, and if not, why not? Exactly.
Linda asks, quoting someone else's research or data is repetitive, and I don't feel like I should be quoting others' comments, but rather use my own thoughts as to how important these horses are to my park experience as well as of those other visitors.
I'm gonna say, like, no offense, Linda, you can put that in there that, you know, how important they are to your park experience, absolutely. But that's not a scientific fact. It's not a historical fact. There is a place for that, but I know Bert Frost had said, and Ginger, you were part of that meeting too. The best comments are the ones that give them other alternatives to consider, tell them why they should like now at this point, Matt, do we say like, please reconsider this? We think you should reconsider this alternative. Is that what happens during this process? Like, are we asking them to like reconsider? We don't feel like you took a hard look at keeping a genetically viable herd.
Yeah, so there was one thing I wanted to actually respond to. Your presentation, one of the slides, and it's probably my fault, but I didn't correct it from a prior one, is you know, what commenting about a given one of the already existing alternatives. Here, you know, the park's purpose and need statement is sort of the gatekeeper for the range of alternatives that will be considered. So the park is under a duty to consider alternatives that are responsive to its own purpose and need. Here, that purpose and need includes stuff about the native ecosystem or native species and natural prairie ecosystem. And when you read the no action alternative or the, you know, current trends, it's evident that they, you know, obviously don't view the horses as native species, and, you know, B, view them as inhibiting a return to a natural prairie ecosystem. And so you're more than welcome to more than welcome to comment on the purpose and need, saying that it's unduly restrictive, and thereby hinders the, you know, the full range of alternatives that the park is really considering. And I know that's a bit technical, but that is something that can be done. Yes, both reconsidering, but you can also say, you know, look, this purpose and need is problematic for a number of reasons. And you know, I would encourage, like you said, encourage you to go take a look at, you know, Chasing Horses' prior comment letter, because I do think that brings up a lot of the same issues regarding native species and the natural prairie ecosystem sort of thing. And while it doesn't specifically talk about it in terms of the purpose and need, you can see where they are only considering alternatives that respond to that. And so you know, I'm hoping that that can be gleaned from our letter and framed in terms of purpose and need statement if you want it. Yeah, that's all I'll say for now. I mean, it's evident from the purpose and need statement that even the no action alternative at this point, the maintenance of the existing herd, even at the 35 to 60, would likely not be responsive to their purpose and need, because they don't view them as, you know, native or responding or inhibiting a return to a natural prairie ecosystem. So the only ones that seem satisfied are the ones that are the horses from the park. So therefore, you know, at this point, purpose and need is an important piece of this puzzle. That's why they got rid of a lot of those other reasonable middle ground alternatives, like, you know, maintaining a smaller herd, a genetically diverse herd, and all of that's evident in Appendix D of their EA. So if you go take a look at that, that gives you a sense of how they've gotten rid of some of these middle ground alternatives.
Thanks, Matt.
Okay, Jane asks, what about the horses managed by NPS at Assateague? Is this not a precedent?
I don't know if you want to talk about that, Matt.
I will say that you're welcome to go take a look at our comment there from the last round that we put together, we do talk about the Assateague wild horses. It's my understanding that, you know, I'll let you, I mean, you can fill me in on what the discussions you've had regarding whether or not the lawfulness of maintaining a wild horse, or I think you have more information about that. But with respect to the Assateague horses, yeah, I go take a look at that comment letter. We do talk about that, and you can see how we can do that.
And the park was asked during the last virtual public meeting, when they said that there's no policy that allows the horses to stay in the park, or livestock, not horses, livestock. When they were asked, what about the horses at Assateague or the Shackelford Banks horses at Cape Lookout National Seashore? And the park said, we can't speak to other management of other parks. So I did reach out to the chief resource manager at Assateague Island, who is very responsive and engages with the public pretty freely. And I said, so, hey, they're getting rid of our horses in Theodore Roosevelt National Park. Are they getting rid of yours? And he said, no, we don't consider them livestock. We consider them a cultural resource. And so we're not getting rid of them. They value the horses. They know that they bring people to their park. So there's no talk about getting rid of them because they didn't reclassify them as livestock. And Matt, I don't know if you want to talk about that a little bit, because that can still come up, correct, in this comment period?
The wildlife designation?
Yeah, that they were reclassified as livestock. Because I know that's something that's a hot button for everybody. And I know it upsets everybody. I know, I'll just let you talk.
No. I'm trying to think of how to say it diplomatically. One thing I'll say is, I don't know that they have been classified. I haven't certainly seen any formal classification by the Park Service. They seem to be just calling it them. And we've asked for that in multiple ways, and so we have not seen any classification as such. And yes, absolutely, that is something that I do think you can take a hard look at, and that they should, whether or not these horses are in fact livestock or wildlife, because I will say, based on my understanding, there are the longhorn that receive veterinary care, feed, and shelter, and then there are the horses that do not. So,
and that was a big discussion that we had when we first met in 2021. We were talking about the classification of the horses, and that was before they started calling them livestock. But that was a whole conversation that we had, that we've been having for a long time, like Matt said. So that's a really good point to still put into your comment letters and still challenge that, because like Matt said, it doesn't appear that the park is taking a hard look at that classification, and they haven't explained to the public how, when, and why that happened.
Yes, and again, I will refer them to our comment letter. That's also discussed in there. Yeah, I'll just leave it there.
I'm going to let Matt answer Castle's question, because I think that, well, so what happens after this comment period closes, Matt? What are the next steps by the National Park Service?
Sure. So I can sort of speak in, I mean, obviously I don't know for sure what they will do, but in the ordinary or processes that I've been involved in, the Park Service will go on to prepare a final EA, assuming they find no significant impact. There will be no EIS. And they will publish a final EA and eventually a finding of no significant impact, which is a FONSI, we call it. There's a lot of acronyms in environmental law, so I apologize if I use them. EIS, environmental impact statement, is the for actions with significant environmental impact. So assuming they find that an EIS is not required, they'll prepare this FONSI, and the Fonzie is the culmination of their NEPA process for this decision. And so at that point, that is it implements the NEPA part of it. It ends the NEPA process for purposes of this livestock management plan. And then presumably they will begin to implement whichever alternative they've adopted. And so the Fonzie will lay out why they don't think there's any significant environmental impact, and the Fonzie will lay out which alternative they've chosen, and then will ultimately lay out why they believe there is no significant environmental impact. If, on the other hand, they determine there is, like I said, there isn't a significant environmental impact, they will go on to prepare an EIS, and that's a whole another round of comments and so on and so forth. It's very rare for that to happen, I'll say that. So I can only think of a couple of times where I've seen that happen ever. So in all likelihood, it headed towards a preparation of a Fonzie, if that makes sense. Hopefully, it's difficult to see if there are follow-on questions if I've got everything that Castle wanted to know about, but that's the real high level of it, I think.
So the park said in January, they kept saying there would be 2 more public comment periods. So this is one. Will we get another public comment period either after the final EA or the Fonzie, or is that something you're just not sure?
Yeah, it's not clear to me. I haven't been able to find where they said that, and I'm not aware of it. I mean, in some instances, there's an opportunity to comment on the final EA in between when the final EA is actually published and before the Fonzie is published. There's an opportunity to comment on that. So perhaps that's what they're referring to, but it's not clear.
This might be our last public comment period. So I think we should look at it that way. This possibly could be our last public comment period.
Possible.
Okay.
Margot asks, without creating a form document or comment, can we attempt to determine another option to offer so that we as a collective group would all agree on or support and offer to the park? I think she's asking if we all give them the same alternative option that might hold more weight.
I think, Matt, you could probably answer to this better, but I think it's whatever option or alternative you're giving them. And I think a very good, an overwhelming.
No, sorry. Go ahead.
I think that whatever you want to propose, you just need to have some kind of backing to what you're stating. I think that there were obviously a lot of collective comments, Matt, that said, keep a genetically viable herd of horses, because they answered to that in the EA. We can absolutely keep pushing for that. I mean, we'll recommend and suggest, but I mean, at the end of the day, it's everyone's own decision on how they comment. We'll recommend things, and we'll recommend all day long a genetically viable herd of horses. That's what needs to stay in the park.
And, I think if I understand Margaret's question correctly, I think this is, perhaps she's asking about, creating or talking about a specific alternative in this form right now so that you can build that consensus around a certain alternative. And, to the extent that everybody, agrees that the horses should remain and that they should be a genetically viable herd, that's certainly something, you can propose and advocate for. But, as the specifics of the alternative, that's something for you, Chris. It's more of a policy question that I certainly am in a position to answer. But, yes, absolutely. Everybody can support an alternative, including those that have been dismissed from further consideration in Appendix D. So, this is something we think needs a hard look. That you should go back, and we all agree that you should go back and take another hard look at this, or not another, but hard look in the first instance at this alternative, and we think it was prematurely dismissed based on an arbitrary purpose and need. That's something we could, yeah.
Well,
So
maybe you can
it could be.
stress that again too. No matter what we suggest to the park, Matt, they're always going to go back to their purpose and need statement. And if what you're suggesting doesn't fit with their new purpose and need, that's where things are getting dismissed. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, exactly. So I can't remember the full list, and I don't have it in front of me at the moment, but Appendix D has the alternative considered but dismissed from further analysis is what it's called, Appendix D. And those included non-reproductive herds permanently maintained, reproductive herds maintained in the park, allowing for a minimum of 150 horses to maintain genetic diversity. There's a number of them. And yeah, those were all dismissed on the basis that they did not respond to the purpose of the need. So because to use their language, this alternative would continue management that is not in alignment with NPS priorities to maintain the native prairie ecosystem. This alternative would not meet the project's purpose and need because it also would not address their impact on natural and cultural resources. So those are all the purpose and need language. So yeah, that's I think the threshold issue is that purpose and need statement. And again, I think it's up to you all to decide what constitutes native and what is a natural prairie ecosystem. As you pointed out in your presentation, I think that's a good point. When are we talking about?
Thanks, Matt.
Julie just had a comment that historical connection to why the horses are unique to the park and cite literature and historical facts. So that was just a comment, not a question. The next question is from Eileen. She says, since the park dismissed all the recommendations, what we were just talking about, Matt, the public offered in the last go-round, how do we approach that this time? Do we repeat what we offered last time? And are there hard facts we can include from all they dismissed in the last 2 pages of the EA?
That's a you, Matt.
Well, I will go back just to address Julie's point, and I think it's a really good one. So I just want, the Park Service operates under the umbrella of their enabling legislation. Not to get too technical, but part of this park's purpose, as they say in their foundation document, is to maintain the historical setting or character and feel that would have been experienced by Theodore Roosevelt during his time in the Badlands. And, I agree that the horses were part of that. Theodore Roosevelt said so himself, and that's certainly something you can talk about. I will note that they dismissed an alternative or dismissed an alternative on purpose and need grounds yet again, on the basis or on that purpose and need basis that would have considered the historical significance of the horses. So that's certainly something I agree with her, and I would encourage people again to go look at our comment letter. Eileen's question about dismiss all the recommendations. Again, yeah, I know I sound like a broken record, but there's clearly a direction that they're trying to head with this management action, and rather than select a preferred alternative, they've chosen this really narrow purpose and need that excludes everything. So yeah, I think questioning that, and with respect to the hard facts, yeah, I think Chris brought up some interesting points that you should go back and look at in the presentation about what are the definitions of the things they're saying, because again, they got rid of all of the recommendations you made last time based on some words that I'm not sure that they told us about. So that's certainly something I would bring up. If I were you, I don't Yeah, if that sort of answers the question, I don't know, Chris, do you think that covers it? I mean, I will say that natural prairie ecosystem and native species in this context is very difficult to pin down because, you know, again, they haven't told us which direction they're actually to when is native, you know. Yeah.
But people can and should, if you had factual data supporting a genetically viable herd or whatever it is you think should be there, you can and should submit a similar comment again, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, with the caveat that, you know, so I think the last round was a scoping period where they were inviting everyone to propose alternatives, just in addition to the ones that they themselves proposed. This round is now, you can still do that, but they've gotten rid of all of those other ones because they've said, well, here's really where we're trying to go. And that statement is right there at the top of the document. So you could say, you know, to the extent that, you know, you disagree with the limiting principle that they put on their NEPA review, you could say, look, I disagree with that, and you know, I think you should consider this alternative in you know, for X and Y reasons.
And hopefully that answers that.
I mean, it's a good question. Yeah, I mean, yeah, absolutely. In broad terms, you don't have to necessarily accept the alternatives that they've offered if you disagree. I mean, yeah.
Clover is asking about the statistics that the park is assessing came from the COVID years and the second thing she noted was they never mentioned the well-researched and documented genetic uniqueness of the herd. We kind of talked about that already with the historical, but about the resulting in a loss of irreplaceable genetic pool. And what about these statistics that they had from the COVID years that are not really relevant now?
I'm not sure which statistics.
She said one example is in regards to photography groups
Oh, I see.
using the park in 2021.
Okay. Yeah, Chris, I think you know a bit more about that, but I will say these are red flags that you should be pointed out as reasons that perhaps they haven't taken quite as hard a look as you think, you know.
Right, so I think that answers it. I think that, and again, this is something that Matt has said to me a lot, and even initially back in March when this came out, you know, NEPA requires the agency to take a hard look. I mean, those exact words are in there. They have to take a hard look at what the impact is, and if they didn't, this is where these would be instances where you would say, I don't believe that you have taken a hard enough look at the impact that whichever impact that you're seeing the red flags on. And yes, there are a lot of them.
I just, you know, to reiterate again, another thing from your presentation is that NEPA is, unfortunately, it's not substantive. It doesn't dictate certain outcomes. It's purely a procedural statute by which they are supposed to be evaluating the full spectrum of effects, right? And so a lot of times, rather than A, disclosing the full spectrum of effects, and B, analyzing those effects with any rigor, agencies will, I will say, paper over them for various reasons. And, you know, if this is something that you've seen where that's happened, then I would encourage you to bring that to their attention. because that's kind of all we can do at this point in this process.
All right, thanks, Matt.
Okay, there is a question from Kim about how this group of horses in the park have not been specifically selectively been bred for or by humans for domestic or agricultural purposes. They don't fall into the NPS's own definition of livestock.
We addressed that in our comment
Good
letter
point.
too.
Yeah.
I believe that, I mean, in our comment letter, we actually have a definition of livestock and say these horses don't fall into that category. And I think this goes again back to what you were saying, Matt, that we don't know when they classified them or if they ever did really classify them as livestock. We've asked for that documentation and we haven't gotten it. So we don't know where this classification came from, but that's actually a valid point. The definition, by definition, they are not livestock.
I agree. I mean, to go back to the point about the acetate horses, I believe they're classified as wildlife there. I think that's what we discovered when we looked into that, and that information is again in our comment letter from the last time. So that's certainly something to bring up, I will say. I agree. It's only by classifying them as livestock that allows them to remove them without further process, I'll say.
And then
Margot, oh, sorry,
Go
go
ahead.
ahead. Margot asks, to piggyback off Eileen's question, would we be best served to request an EIS as an alternative option again?
not as an alternative, that's as a next step, correct, Matt?
Oh, sorry. Yes. Well, yeah. Just to be clear, Margaret, sorry. Alternative in the NEPA context as a term of art takes on specific meaning. So to the extent that you mean it as, as a NEPA alternative, no. I mean, an EIS would not be an action alternative. But a threshold, or rather the sum of the EA, I should say, is that that there is no significant impact on the human environment, is what they mean. And so that incorporates, all of the things they've talked about here, in addition to more, as pointed out in some of these questions. I think the tourism issue, for instance. Yeah, and so and it also includes beneficial, both beneficial and negative impact. So in effect, what they're saying is that removing these horses will have no effect, either beneficial, no significant effect, whether beneficial or negative, to the environment of the park. So, I think that the position of chasing horses, as you've seen in our comment letter, that we, disagree with that conclusion. And yes, I do think I certainly think that an EIS is prepared. I mean, in my opinion, and just speaking for myself and not on behalf of chasing horses, yeah, I mean, I think it's wild that, fundamentally remaking the character of the park doesn't constitute a significant environmental impact I think is wrong. And so I do think that they need to do an EIS. I do think there needs to be more careful look at this. So yeah, I agree.
And people should state that in their comment letter, correct?
Yeah, and again, sound like a broken record. I'd go back to the letter because we talked about this last time when we first heard that they were doing an EA. We pointed out that this was not we disagreed with that, and that was in our letter, and we laid out all of the legal reasons why. So yeah, I would go take a look at that for sure.
Okay, thank you.
And thanks for the question. Yeah, absolutely.
Sherry has a question, Chris, that we discussed when we met
Yes.
with the Park Service. She asked, do we know how much the park says horse management costs them? Is it in their budget? When we discuss alternatives, including state helping, what amount do they talk about when they deem it a burden? And we got a very strange answer from the Park Service on this.
Right, so we talked to the park, we had a meeting in July. We met with Regional Director Herbert Frost and Superintendent Angie Richmond. Blake McCann, the Chief of Resource Management, was there. And a couple of the people from the Park Service. And I had, Ginger was one of the people who was there for our meeting. And we also had our House Majority Leader for North Dakota, Mike LaFour there, Representative Mike LaFour. And so, and I know Ginger can probably speak to this, and Matt also, this is different than the BLM because like normal BLM cases or normal wild horse cases, because in this case, and Scott Beckstead talked about this in his Wild Horse Wednesday this past week. In this case, we have everyone from advocates, the state of North Dakota, the Stockmen's Association, like that doesn't happen in wild horse advocacy. We have the business community. We have our federal legislators. We have, I mean, anyone and everyone saying, keep these horses in the park, please, we'll work with you. What do we need to do? North Dakota is also unique because they have their own bank. And with all the oil production that's been going on here, North Dakota has what we call a legacy fund. And they have given endowments for different things like the Theodore Roosevelt Library. So I talked to Representative Mike LaFour after our meeting because, and you can chime in if you need to, Ginger, Bert Frost had said, you know, one of the things that they look at now, so he gave an example, someone wants to donate money to build a new visitor center. He's like, that's great. But what the park is looking at is the total cost of ownership. So if somebody donates a new visitor center, that's wonderful, but how do we maintain that over the years? And we know, again, I can't stress enough, we love Theodore Roosevelt National Park. And I think everybody on here will say that, right? We love the park. We love going to the park. We support the park. You know, I would love to see a new visitor center, right? That's great. There have been things that have happened within the park that me and my husband personally have supported, you know, when they had wildfires, bringing food, bringing water, doing what we can. We disagree with the management of the horses. So we don't hate everybody who works for the park. Yelling at people on the phone when you call the park, those aren't the people who are making the decisions. So we support the park, we just disagree with their management of the horses. So he had said, what the park is doing now, or what the National Park Service is doing, is when somebody wants to give them something, they're looking at an endowment. So if somebody wants a visitor center, what we need an endowment that's going to make sure that we can maintain this visitor center through the years. And you can understand for them right now, 19,000 people commented and said, hey, keep the horses, we'll do whatever we can to help you. But if they say, okay, yeah, we'll keep the horses, what's going to happen next year, next month, next week, when they've already said that everyone's going to go on with their lives and it doesn't matter anymore, the horses are staying, and then now how do they live with the decision? So he said to us in the meeting, if you're talking about an endowment, then we need to have another conversation. And so I did talk to Mike LaFour after that, and I said, hey, North Dakota has money. What can we do? What's doable? He's like, well, how much money are we talking about? What does it cost to maintain these horses? And I said, I will email Bert Frost and ask him. So I said, hey, I think that this endowment thing might be real, but I need a number. Like, what is the total cost of ownership of the horses? And he pretty much told me that it doesn't matter what the cost of ownership of the horses is. That's not the driving force behind this. And like just kind of dismissed it. And that was the end of it. So we are looking at a FOIA request to find out what the total cost of ownership of the horses is, because I believe that we have a right to know that.
Well, I think the total cost is very minimal because there is so much forage in the park. It could support 1,000 horses. There is so much forage there. It doesn't cost anything. They don't have to feed them. These wild horses take care of themselves. The only thing they spend money on is the fertility control, and they're using Gonacon, which we all hate, and there's lots of things against Gonacon because it can be a sterilant, but that's
and removals. But I think they would also talk about administrative costs, you know, documentation, and I'm all for that. That's fine, but let us know what that number is. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Matt.
Well, so, I do, where in reality, the practical cost of it is likely a driving decision. That I don't disagree with you on that point. But I will note that for purposes of this NEPA review, I can go back to the purpose and need statement, because the cost is not part of their purpose, and they haven't said they need to do this because it's too expensive.
Right.
They've said they need to do this because of the parks management direction, or so. Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely relevance to it, but it's certainly not something that is on paper driving the decision at this point of the NEPA process.
Did come out of our meeting though, we did specifically ask that. But
Yeah.
so again, like just to reiterate, no matter what you're going to propose as an alternative or whatever, go back to the purpose and need statement, Matt, because that's really like everyone
Yeah.
should be commenting about the narrowness of the purpose and need statement and how it's
Yeah, that is the limiting principle on the management direction. I mean, that is where they are laying out exactly why they are doing what they're doing. All of the action alternatives envision removing the horses. And the reason for that is set out there. And so to the extent that, this group, feels that they want to maintain the horse herd, which I, obviously support, the problem starts at the top, basically, of the document, with the very reason for this action in the first place. I mean, that's just, again, that's just, I think, one piece of it is all that, that is, step one. I do think, the EIS is also necessary, but I keep stressing that because it is what is excluding all of the maintaining the herd option at this point.
So if they were gonna do an EIS map, what would that look like and where would that go? If they were like, you know what, you're right, what would that look like?
So it's a good question.
It doesn't happen often enough, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, so they would, at the end of this process, I mean, assuming, I doubt they would put out a final EA. My guess is they would, abandon the process altogether, and then change course and, scope, put out another public scope of notice saying that they're going to, in light of significant environmental concerns, or yada yada, they're gonna examine a new range of alternatives and prepare an EIS. And that's a much longer document and a lot more thorough in terms of impacts, and the baseline conditions. So it's it is, I think, the appropriate document here, but it's a longer process. It does look like the process we have gone through thus far. So I will say, I mean, like, it would look familiar to you in that there's a scoping period where there will be a list of alternatives, and then there will be a draft EIS and an EIS. At the end of that decision, though, instead of a FONSI, they prepare something called a record of decision, which is the culmination of that NEPA process and memorializes their decision on which alternative they've chosen.
Then would this whole process almost essentially start over again with the EIS? Like there would be a couple of the comment periods before they got to the record of decision?
There would, to the extent they were doing an EIS.
If they said they were, yes.
Yeah, I mean, so presumably there would be another comment period. If they were to do an EIS, yeah, I would think so. I have to go back and take a look. I don't want to overstep, but yes, I mean, public comment's definitely necessary for an EIS. I mean, not to get too technical, but under NEPA's implementing regulations, I'm gonna decline to answer this, but decline to answer further. But yeah, we would hope there would be another comment period. Yeah, the regulations implementing NEPA certainly require comments for an EIS. And they couldn't just go straight into a final EIS from this draft EIS. I would think, but I don't want to comment further than that.
Question from Julie, where is the budget for them to remove and change the park? I guess that's in reaction to them not wanting to spend money on the horses.
Right, all the helicopter roundups and all of that they talked about in the EA would come from their budget, which comes from our tax dollars. And that's a good question to ask the park. I mean, I would ask them that for sure at the meeting, where their money is kind of come for week-long helicopter roundups, because that's, if you didn't read the EA, that's what they're going to do. They're going to go back to helicopter roundups, and I think there would be, I think it said, Matt, if I'm right, and again, you guys can read it for yourself, there would be an initial week-long helicopter roundup, so a week of running the horses around the park. And for an example, I think it was last week, they used helicopters to round up the elk, and it caused a whole ruckus between all the wild horse bands, because even though they haven't had a wild horse roundup since 2013, the horses remember. So anytime the helicopters go up, whether it's for bison, elk, the horse don't know that. They just know it's a danger sign and they run. So, I mean, a week of the horses running through the park is horrible and hideous. But yeah, where's that expense coming from? It's going to come from our tax dollars.
I think she was asking, where is it in their budget?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
Because they don't have money to fix the road. We've been waiting 4 years for the loop road to get fixed. So, I mean,
yeah.
I don't know if you have anything to add, Matt.
Yeah, well, I don't know the answer to the question, but it is Julie's pointed, to the extent that you're asking, where is the money coming from to conduct these roundups? It's certainly something you could ask for in your comments of the park. And
During the public engagement reading.
What impact might that have on parks management priorities?
Okay, Margot is asking, what animal is it that they want to reintroduce into the park? She forgot. And could they find some documentation to argue that the horses would not impact them?
So from what I've heard and what I understand is and I think that they talked about this, I can't remember, in the civic engagement meeting last time, they wanted to reintroduce the black-footed ferret, which is on the endangered species list, which is bringing a whole nother level of concern for people in North Dakota. And I think, and again, I don't know science, ecology, any of that, but the black-footed ferret has something to do with returning to a natural prairie ecosystem. So, I don't understand what that has to do with the horses, because it's not like they're competing for food. The black-footed ferret is presumably why the prairie dog population has gone haywire, because the black-footed ferret would eat the prairie dogs, and the horses don't eat prairie dogs. So I'm not sure where that comes from. And then also too, there was something, I think what you're talking about with the next part of your question, Margot, is they did talk about in the EA how the horses could possibly have an impact on smaller mammals like the prairie dogs. And yes, using Teton and Nichols in their bands, living like actually in a prairie dog town. That's where we seen them, Ginger, when you were in the park with us. So there were the bands of horses of that prairie dog town. And in the EA, they do make a comment that the horses could have a negative impact on the prairie dogs. And we're seeing them cohabitating just fine, and have been for as long as I can remember. So I think that those things are good to refute what they said in their EA, if you want to make that part of your comment period. I think, Matt, right? I mean, if you have things that are, where they didn't take a hard enough look, again, it's going to go back to that. Make sure that you talk about that in your comment.
I'm not terribly familiar with the issue of the reintroduction, so I don't think I can really provide any insight on that.
It's something that's been talked about a lot, and I do think that she mentioned it in the last civic engagement meeting. But what's concerning people in North Dakota, since we've gotten here, are very concerned. The prairie dog population is out of control. And it's to the point where now, like, they're, if you have a ranch on the other side of the park, they're on the interstate now. And so people are saying, well, now that this black-footed ferret thing came out, now we're understanding why the prairie dog population is going haywire. But then somebody else said that it has something to do with the natural ecosystem. And again, that I don't know that for sure. I do know that it's come up a lot because it's a concern to people in North Dakota, because it is an endangered species. And when it gets out of the park, and there are oil wells around the area, there are ranches around the area, they're afraid that those areas will be shut down because it happened in Wyoming. And so it's got the people in North Dakota up in arms. So that's part of that. So
Yeah, I have, I guess, for purposes of this NEPA process, there's nothing in the EA about this, so I'm not sure that.
second part of her thing was about, they did talk about small mammals. So like prairie dogs, and that the horses could be detrimental to the prairie dog population. And there are literally bands of horses that spend a lot of their time in prairie dog towns. So, I mean, we have proof that they're cohabitating. So yes, that can be put into their comment letter.
Marlene has a question asking who is making the final DR. Is it done at TRNP or at a higher level in Washington?
So I know from talking to Senator Hoven's office, they have no idea where this direction is coming from. So I know he's talking to the National Park Service in Washington, D.C. I know that Governor Burgum has talked to the National Park Service Director, Sams, and he always seems happy with their conversations. He feels like he's listening and being engaged. So I do think that given his comment last week when the EA came out, he's still willing to work with the park. And to the best of my knowledge, the park has not responded to Governor Burgum's request to pretty much do anything the state of North Dakota can do to help keep the horses. So that's a good question that nobody seems to have the answer to, like where this direction's coming from and where the driving force is. I do know, and people have said, I mean, over the years, and if you look at Dr. Castle McLaughlin's report, it'll show you they repeatedly have tried to get rid of the horses. There's a history of this from the moment they realized they were fenced into the park. I talked to a former governor of North Dakota, Ed Schaefer, and he said, this time it really got some teeth. And he was really hoping that when the EA came out, like we all were, that it would have a different outcome. But there's a history of this, and people note that all the time. And it's very well documented in Dr. McLaughlin's report.
Castle is asking, can or must they revise the foundation documents to reflect their final DR to abandon interest in Teddy Roosevelt as a rancher and only focus on his conservation legacy? Is there evidence that they're planning to do so?
Sorry, do you mind if I so just really quickly to go back to Marlene's question? I mean, the ultimate, assuming it's a FONSI at the end of this EA, will be typically recommended by the park superintendent and then ultimately approved or adopted by the regional director. In terms of whose name actually goes on the document. I mean, obviously there are political considerations to which Chris is certainly more in tune, but I do want to stress that the consensus-based management alternative is that they have in their regulation. While it may seem silly, I mean the decision makers are people, and I do think helping them to understand that there is a consensus, and that the people in their community that they live in supported keeping the horses. I think that's helpful. I mean, because I do, at the end of the day, they do want to work side by side with their community to make the best possible park. I mean, I believe that. So I think that is helpful for just to understand, anecdotal stuff even is, while it may not be necessarily the most effective, it is certainly, it has some effect. So that. Sorry, didn't mean to. did you want Ginger? I'm sorry. What was it?
Oh, the next question was, do the foundation documents have to be revised to support their final DR? I think that's what the question is asking.
An interesting question, and it's a good one. They talk about this in the EA, which I'm assuming that's what Castle's referring to. And I'm gonna decline the answer right now. I will, but I think it's a fair question. It is an interesting point that, you know, this does seem to conflict with that.
Jane had a little bit of a a little finger stuck or something, but Linda asks, have you seen Ross McPhee's permafrost DNA study? Shows many animals and when they evolved here. That could help with the historical data, I'm sure.
I think he talked about that a little bit in our horse talk that we had with him, and that is on our YouTube channel, so people can look at that. He absolutely had a lot of great points that he made, so I would encourage people to look at that and look at papers that he's written. So that would be a great resource for scientific documentation for your comments.
I also think Dr. McLaughlin pointed out that in the beginning of her report as well, right? That
Right.
there is evidence to show that, yeah, horses had that here.
Hassel comments that the park wants to put in more bison as part of their bison initiative, and it provides them with a justification for removing horses. Well, it's hardly a justification. The horses and bison have coexisted for as long as bison have been on the continent. And by the way, wild horses have been on the continent 55 million more years than the bison.
I don't know if you want to talk to this, Matt, because they did add in their purpose and need statement the bison initiative by the director's
Yeah.
order.
Correct. No, I think it's another great comment. Yes, it's a great comment. It's a good observation, and it's interesting that, you know, bison are also foraging animals. So that's a good point when it comes to the detrimental effects that horses have versus detrimental effects that bison might have. I believe the EA talks a little bit about that, and I know we talked about that in the comment letter a little bit, but yeah, no, I mean, I think it's good that people are aware.
I also was talking to Eric Molbar today from Western Watershed Project, and that's something that you were just talking about, Matt, that his organization is bringing up. And I think we're going to try to put a horse talk together with him so he can go over the ecological things and things like that. You know, how can you say that the horses are ruining the environment? How can you pinpoint it to that? Where's the report that shows? And some really good, you know, questions that he is very well versed in to help break down those parts of the EA. So I'm hoping that we can get a horse talk with him within the next week or two.
Certainly, and he's also very well versed in NEPA as well. So to the
Right.
extent that, yeah, questions, he's also well situated to answers on them. Yeah,
He even said he doesn't feel that they took a hard look at this part of it. So
yeah, and I would, you know, we recognize that it's a sort of an amorphous standard, but it is the one that's the Supreme Court has required agencies to use. So yes, and yeah, we'll leave it there. And to Castle's point about Dr. McLaughlin's point about them introducing more bison, I think that is another part of the purpose and need statement. So it is, again, something that people can comment on and should. Yeah, I mean, to the extent that you feel that there is either a disparate impact or if the impact would be the same with, you know, equal amounts of bison.
all right.
That's all the questions. People just signing off and thanking you, Chris.
Okay.
And
And I want to thank Matt, and I know Matt, Matt has company. He's got a young baby, and I'm really appreciate you being here, Matt. I know that everyone else does appreciate that too. I
Got
just
me on the
appreciate.
diaper duty for a little bit.
Well, that's good. We're glad we could help.
Great.
And like I said, I really appreciate Matt. He's been great. It's been almost like 2-3 years, Matt. We've been talking. It's crazy.
Yeah, yeah.
Time flies.
I
But Matt's been
appreciate
great.
being able to help.
It's been
Really
great
do.
at helping me understand all this, and Eubanks and Associates been great too. So I will be doing a talk again next Friday with Barb at ECI, and we'll have information on our website about that. And then the week after that, I'll be with Heather from Save Our Wild Horses doing a similar Zoom presentation. So if you have other questions or different questions, feel free to email me. If I can't answer, I can always reach out to Matt too and ask him for an answer. So just because he's signing off now doesn't mean he's signing off forever. Our organization is utilizing him, and our organization is made up of our followers. So if there's questions you have, if we can't answer, I will gladly reach out to Matt, who I know would be more than happy to answer.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for involving me again. I should note that I am a son of North Dakota myself, the opposite side of the state, but my parents when we were little would go take us to horses. So it's a special place, and I hope I support this organization's mission. So thank you to Chris for all you've done.
Thank you. And thank you everybody for coming, and thank you, Ginger, for co-hosting on the fly with me. And I'll have, like I said, I'll be doing some blog posts next week that kind of break down the comments a little bit more and give you some reference points and things like that. And again, if you have questions, feel free to email us. And thank you again, and everyone have a great night.
Right.
thanks, Chris.
Thank you.